Now, as we revealed earlier in the show, Manchester City have won their legal challenge against the Premier League over APT rules. The man who broke that story was the chief correspondent for the Times, Matt Lawton, and he joins us now. Good afternoon, Matt.
Hi, Charlie.
A busy afternoon.
Yes, it's fair to say the phone hasn't stopped ringing, but no, it's been a busy few days. So it's a major story. It's a story that we broke back in June. The fact that City had this counter action against the Premier League. We obviously all know about the 115 charges, but this was a particular point that they were taking the Premier League to task on around sponsorship rules. And the verdicts, look, you can just see in the contrasting statements between Manchester City and the Premier League that have emerged in the last hour or so that they still don't entirely agree on who's won what. But the fact of the matter is, there are aspects of the rules that have been found by 3 retired judges to be in breach of competition law in this country. And the one that we think is significant is around these shareholder loans. And shareholder loans are basically the loans that are the money that is lent to clubs by their owners, by their shareholders. And right now, across the Premier League landscape, there's 1.5 billion quid's worth of these loans. Everton have got over 400 million in these loans. Arsenal got over 200 million in these loans. And prior to this judgment, they weren't deemed to be part of any kind of financial regulation. They were deemed to sit outside. But the judges agree with City that they should be part of it, because how vastly different are they to being given a sponsorship deal by a company linked to the owners? And the knock-on effect of that, we think, is if they now have to be part of regulation, because these are interest-free loans, that then it's going to distort, it's going to change, essentially the return that clubs have to provide every year on how much they've spent.
Doesn't it affect, we heard earlier that it doesn't affect the 115 charges, but surely the argument by City then would be, well, we wouldn't have fallen foul of PSR rules if we'd been allowed to take these 2 large sponsorship deals. Doesn't one thing feed into the other?
Well, it's certainly the same territory. A lot of these charges are around sponsorship rules, and in particular in relation to companies linked to the owners of Manchester City. I think the point that people will make is that the APT rules that they've objected to didn't come in until 2021, and all the 115 charges relate to situations prior to that, and seasons prior to that. But you just have to think that if now there's an issue with the rules around sponsorship agreements, that surely has an impact. But you probably need Lord Panic to come and sit in the studio and explain exactly how and why. That is yet to be determined how that plays out.
So you don't think this does set any sort of precedent for that financial advantage for other clubs? We were just saying, like, this is good. If this goes through, surely this is good news for, I don't know, Aston Villa have got very wealthy owners. Birmingham City have got very wealthy owners. How does this affect?
I think one of the things that changes in the most basic terms is that City were complaining that when it comes to actually determining with the Premier League what is fair market value for a sponsorship deal, for instance, that they don't get access to all the relevant information, that just the process isn't fair in certain aspects of it. No one is arguing, certainly not the 3 judges, that there shouldn't be some regulation around this. The APT rules, there has to be a system there, and things do need to be of some kind of fair market value. But the point they're making is that I think that the changes that will follow will allow clubs to argue more that it's the sort of apples and oranges argument that you can't say. For instance, I was talking to a colleague about this the other day. And if he's listening, he'll be thinking, I said that. But anyway, but no. But the point they were making is that how can you put a value to Qatar on having their brand on the shirts of Paris Saint-Germain? You know what I mean? So what does that sort of how can you compare that to, say, a betting company, a Chinese betting company, and their exposure compared to what that means to a country like Qatar when they're trying to sort of, develop themselves as this sporting destination and all this kind of stuff, and hosting World Cups and all that kind of thing. So it's really the changes that will come. I think will allow clubs to negotiate higher fees for these kind of transactions.
And there's rumours going about of a massive point deduction for City. They are just rumours, but does this make it less likely? Are the Premier League going to be slightly concerned about clobbering City with a massive penalty if they know, they're going to be subjected to this kind of legal?
Well. Ultimately, it's an independent panel that will determine that. But look, I think first of all, it's the same legal team fighting both cases. So what it does say is City have got good lawyers, right?
Yeah.
But I don't actually think, Andy, anyone wants points deductions one thing, relegation another. I don't think it's in anyone's interest to relegate Manchester City. I don't even think it's in the interest of the other clubs to relegate Manchester City. We're talking about a time right now when the Premier League is expanding globally, when 40 million Americans are watching Premier League football over the course of a season on NBC. The last thing you want to do is take the best team out of it. So I think it's a really difficult situation for the Premier League, not just for Manchester City and the Premier League as an organisation, but all 20. Because, as I say, who wants a Premier League without Pep Guardiola and Kevin De Bruyne and co? So, but at the same time, if they're deemed to have been in breach of some of these regulations, then there has to be some form of punishment. And given what other clubs have been, given in terms of points deductions, if a number of these breaches are found to be, alleged breaches are found to be actual breaches, then you assume that they are going to get the book thrown at them. But as I say, this was the first area of battle, and City are, while the Premier League are slightly disputing it in their own statement, the City are claiming victory here.
Mm-hmm. Interesting with the UEFA as well, because of course the rules are different, aren't they? So,
Yeah, because the crucial thing with the rules there was a period. There was a lot of it are timed out with UEFA, but there aren't such rules in the Premier League.
How do you see it playing out, Matt? How do you see the next week or so playing out?
I think I just think right now the Premier League is, there is civil war here. It's very messy. This is not a good place. While we're enjoying watching the football on a Saturday and Sunday, there's a lot of friction here. The original story we did back in June was the fact that, I think you had 8 or 9 clubs giving evidence in this particular case. In support of the Premier League. The clubs are divided. It's a messy situation, and the consequence of this, I come back to these shareholder loans. If you are Arsenal with over 200 million quid worth of shareholder loans, this is a worrying development.
I think it's bad news for Arsenal, particularly. Matt, you broke the story. I'm sure you'll be writing about it in the Times tomorrow. Yep.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. Unless I'm fired between now and then, yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully, yeah.
Well, keep an eye on that as well.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Matt. That's right. Matt Lawton,
Cheers.
Chief Sport Correspondent, with his final ever column for the Times. So exciting, breaking news. Now, there we are, Andy. It's been a lovely afternoon. Thank you very much.
It was very complex.
Paul Hawksbee and Andy Jacobs, Monday to Friday afternoons 1 till 4 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.